So welcome to the Novel Idea Society. Amy, thank you so much for coming. And I guess I'm to formally introduce myself. I'm Sam. And this book club is my baby. This is the last book for year 7. So if we've read year 7 or year 8, we started in 2016. We've been doing this for a little while. So thank you for being a part of the long list of books now that we have read in this book club in its various iterations. We're going to talk today about Pebble and Dove, which was, I have to admit, the perfect June read. Like, it is the perfect summer book. Was that intentional for you with the release at the end of May?
Yeah, I mean, I feel like my publishers know they know the best time for my books. And yeah, I think all of my books have all come out around the end of May, the beginning of June, because I do think that they have, all have had kind of a summery vibe to them. It's kind of, I like to write about stuff that I like, and I like summer.
Okay, so tell me about Pebble and Dove. Where did you get the idea for this? We'll call it an unlikely friendship.
Yeah, I mean, there was a couple of different places where the novel began. Usually when I start writing a novel, I kind of have a bunch of different things that I try to like mash together and see how they work, because I'm one of those people that like I'm full of ideas all the time. So my parents and my grandparents have been spending winters in Florida since before I can remember. So I have been going there for a really long time. And it was only a few years ago, maybe like, I don't know, like 7 or 8 years ago, I was there with my parents and they told me that they had seen this manatee while they were out kayaking. And I don't even really think I had a vague idea of what a manatee was, but I didn't realize they were so prevalent everywhere in Florida. So there's kind of this inside joke in my family that, I really always desperately want to see wildlife and I never do. So like my parents will go out and they'll see like the most amazing creatures, and then I'll go out and I'll see nothing. So it was a few more years before I actually did see a manatee. And we were out kayaking one day, and a mother and a baby manatee came and like right up to our kayaks, and like it was just such an incredible experience for me. Like it was really because they're so curious and they're so playful, and just they're really chill, laid back animals. But of course that is also to their detriment a lot of the time, because they were coming up to our kayak and that was safe, but they also would do the same thing if it was a speedboat or something like that. So a lot of the manatees that you see in the wild have these big dents on their back. But they're also so resilient, they get those dents and they keep going. And that really spoke to me. So I kind of knew that I love writing about animals and I especially love marine animals. As a child, like many of us, I think I wanted to be a marine biologist and then didn't do so great in science when I was in high school. And I grew up in Halifax, so I grew up by the ocean, and like I've always just really been drawn to writing stories about the ocean. So I knew I wanted to write about a manatee. And then I had visited a manatee who was the oldest manatee in captivity in an aquarium in Bradenton, and I was just like so like intrigued by the fact that like this manatee in captivity had lived a good like 40, 50 years longer than manatees do in the wild. And so I started thinking about, sort of what that means about, the impacts that humanity has on the manatee's environment, and, what would happen if a manatee was kept in cat, like how long could they actually live? And so that was kind of the spark for the manatee aspect of it. And then, I had this other story that I had been thinking about a lot about, sort of this 3 generations of women in a family, and, them sort of having, a bit of a communication breakdown and having a lot of secrets between them, and how they're able to like come back together. And those, at first I was like, I don't know how these 2 stories are going to fit together. But, I'm also really always been intrigued by sort of, the idea of like quirky like roadside attractions and stuff like that. So that's sort of how, how I ended up bringing them all together and bringing them to Florida to sort of meet this manatee.
Of those three women, which one's most like you?
Oh my goodness. I mean, I think there's parts of me in all of them, really. Like I definitely relate to Dove a lot. Even though I'm now an adult, I still a lot of times feel like a teenage girl often. And I think I really like I wanted to make her feel like contemporary, but I also, thought back a lot to the way that I felt and thought, and just that idea of like when you're that young and you have so much passion for things and you're so idealistic, and a lot of times the world tries to take that away from you, and sort of not respect that as much because, oh, you're just a teenage girl, what could you know about anything? And I think there's so much power in that idealism and that passion that young women have. So I really wanted to sort of capture that. And then, Lauren is probably the closest to my age. And there are aspects of her personality, just the idea that she's always trying to like hold everything together. I think a lot of us can relate to that, feeling, really, really overwhelmed, but thinking, I just have to put on a face for the world. And I suppose there's also part of me in Imogen as well. I am a working artist, and I think I've struggled my whole life with that idea of career versus family, and sort of where that's going to fit into my life. So I think that there's like parts of me in every single one of my characters.
Is that part of you in the scene with the bees?
I mean, only in my imagination.
Did you get the idea for that? Like that was a pretty detailed revenge theme, we'll call it.
Yeah, I mean, it evolved, right? Because at first I didn't really know a lot about bees. So I sort of, originally had them like attacking them, but then I didn't really want that to happen because I didn't want anything bad to happen to the bees. So I just had them, so I started reading a lot about like bee swarms and stuff like that. And, just had them sort of swarm on her head, and that they were all returned safely to their hive at the end. But yeah, honestly, I can't really remember where the spark for that came, except for the fact that like I am actually terrified of bees myself. And maybe not necessarily
where you just don't want it to happen to yourself.
Yeah, exactly. Like when I was like, okay, what's the worst thing that someone could do to me to get revenge on me? And that would probably be it.
When it comes to the trailer park, have you spent time in, as they would call them, a mobile community? Some of them are quite fancy. Did you spend time? How did you do the research? Because it felt very authentic reading it.
That's good to hear, because I 100% modeled it on the trailer park where my parents live. That part is like, there's a lot of little details that I took from like not the park itself, but the trailer for sure. It's been it's not in the greatest shape at the moment. And my stepmom and I have been trying to convince my dad to maybe like fix a few things, or maybe get a new trailer. So there was a few little details, like we used to have to put the rock in front of the bathroom door to keep it closed, and we used to have to turn the shower on with a wrench. So those were little details that I did steal from their trailer, but also I put them in as kind of like a little gift to my stepmom, because when she read it, she definitely recognized those little things. And as for the rest of the park, I mean, there's so many places like that in Florida. There sort of these retirement residences, and they all have the thing that fascinates me about them is they all have their own ecosystem. Really, they have their own like hierarchy and their own like rules, and like any community does. But I think it's this interesting like microcosm of people who, especially when people move there, they're generally retired, or on the verge of retirement, so they have a lot of time on their hands to either sort of maybe take up a craft or some strange hobby, or maybe get a little nosy with each other. I mean, the trailers are also like close together as well. It's like you're very everyone's on top of each other. So it's really hard not to know everything that's going on in the trailer park.
That brings me nicely to my next question, which is about Dr. Harvey and the rule infraction after rule infraction after rule infraction and the yelling. As someone who has a very, I won't be, my mom's super nosy. She like knows everything that's going on in the neighborhood. Like she sends me stuff at work all the time. So, and I think she's proud of it. So I don't think that I'm telling tales out of school. But I feel like my dad calls her Mrs. Kravitz, which is like a throwback to Bewitched, I believe, right? And was it important for you for her to have that foil character in there?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, she sort of, she also evolved throughout the writing of the book. At first she was just kind of like a side character, and then she just like, she was so assertive and she was like, I want to be here for everything. So she ended up becoming a bit of a bigger character. But I just, I'm very similar, I think, in some ways to your mom. Like I keep a ton of plants in my front window so I can pretend to water them when stuff's going on in my neighborhood.
Do you have binoculars by your patio door?
I do not have binoculars. I haven't gotten that far yet. But maybe someday. Yeah, I find it so fascinating because like you have this relationship with your neighbors that you don't really have with anybody else, because in some ways you're so intimate with them. Like they know your comings and goings, they've seen you out in your backyard in your bathrobe taking out the garbage. Like they know things about you that other people don't, but you don't have any choice in who they are. I'm thinking about this now because the house next door to us just sold, and the new owners are taking possession this week, and we're just like, who is it going to be? Like, are they going to be like a Carol Harvey, or are they going to be, someone who we end up becoming really, really close friends with? So yeah, I think I'm really fascinated about that, by that dynamic and that relationship. And so, I wanted to bring in a character who was like an adversary in some ways. But I also, she started to evolve the more that I thought about her and the more that I wrote about her, into someone who, it's less that she was, there was some reasons behind her cantankerousness. And, she does have, she does get to have her own little, her own voice at one point, where you sort of learn maybe a little bit more about her. And, the fact that like, her life, she's always been fighting to assert herself. And so she has to sort of, have this persona. And, I think for me, that's like kind of like one of those little windows into a person who, like, sometimes you meet someone and you're like, I don't understand why they're like that, but there usually is a reason why they're like that. And I really like to show that, like, sometimes if you allow yourself to like open up to people who are a little bit more, maybe seem a little bit more closed off to you, that you can learn a lot about them.
Speaking of learning a lot about people, let's talk about the social media aspect of it, because you invented a social media network for your story, which sounds a lot like TikTok or YouTube, something that's hip with kids. And Dove has this like secret life that blows up because of the bees online. That her parents don't know about. I think that's something that a lot of parents can probably relate to, that they don't necessarily know what the heck their kids are doing online. Why did that aspect of the story matter? Because without the social media aspect, I mean, I guess for the mobilization at the end of the book, but without it, this could have easily been set in the 50s. Like it has this like nostalgic feel to it.
Yeah, I mean, I'm glad that you said that, because I definitely, like, when I was putting together, like, I put together like a mood board for the book, and it was all like these like old Florida, like Art Deco kind of 50s, like swimming pool kind of, I think also because there's, characters who are older and like nostalgic for that time. But, I also like, when I write, I tend to, I'm interested in like contemporary problems and the contemporary world, and I decided to go with a like semi-invented social media app, just because in my last book, Every Little Piece of Me, we had there was like these sort of social media interstitials that were like very specifically like Twitter, Instagram, Facebook, and the headaches around trying to just understanding like, okay, well, back in, because it was also like a little bit earlier in time. So it's like, oh, in 2017, did Instagram have this feature? In 2019, were you able to do this on Twitter? And I mean, it's not that like necessarily it would take away from it if we got it wrong, but there are people who, when you're reading it, you don't want a person to go, oh, wait a minute, that's not right. That's not how it was in real life. So, I tend to, it's kind of the same reason why I fictionalize like towns that I write about, for instance, is, they may resemble actual places, but it gives me the creative freedom to kind of play around and maybe put something on the other side of town that isn't on that side of town, just for like narrative reasons. So it was the same thing with the Kazoo app, is that like I wanted to invent something that I could play around with and like have it do what I needed it to do in the story, without having it be beholden to the rules of YouTube or TikTok. But yeah, and it's also because, I'm not, I mean, I use social media quite a bit, but like the whole like video app world is very, very like foreign to me. I'm used to Twitter, where I can just like type my little thoughts and send them off into the world and no one has to see my face. And so I was trying to sort of use like my like how I felt about it and how mysterious I felt about it, and translate that into like the way the older characters in the book feel about it, because it is a little bit confusing to them as well how it works. And I think, for someone Dove's age, it's just intuitive, right? It's like they don't even think about it. And I don't even think she necessarily thought about the fact that she was keeping it from her parents. It was just a part of her everyday life. And it's somewhere along the line, I think she even says something like, Mom probably never even looked at my Kazoo account, like just assuming that she would know about it and would be able to find it. Whereas, it would never occur to her mom to look for it. So, there was like, I was playing a little bit with that, like, schism about the way that different generations also interact with social media. But yeah, it's just so much easier sometimes to make things up so you can play around with them.
Okay, let's talk about how you write. Are you a plotter or a fly by the seat of your pants writer?
I am unfortunately the latter. I wish that I was the former. Yeah, so Pebble Dove is my third novel. And every time I start a new novel, I think, okay, I'm going to write an outline and I'm going to stick to it. And every single time I don't. And I think, I've sort of come to terms with it now. I think, I am the type of writer who likes to figure stuff out on the page. So I experiment a lot. So I'll have ideas for characters. And I try to not think too much about what the story is going to be. I usually have like a vague idea in my head of what I want the story to be, but I found that trying to force characters into a story, at least for me, that process doesn't work. So, I play around, I put them in scenarios, I put them together and see what they do when they talk to each other. And then I write way too many drafts. I end up writing, I think I wrote 12 drafts of this one. Yeah, 3 of them, even before I was working with my editor, I was just like, this isn't ready. I'm still fiddling around. I'm still trying to figure this out. I think at one point I put the whole thing in first person. Like it's all very much trial and error for me. And yeah, I think, everyone has their own process, and I'm really, really jealous of people who are able to outline. At some point I do actually, like usually after about like 3 or 4 drafts, I will make myself an outline of what is happening already in the story so I can keep track of it. I wish I was also better at that, because, we get to like the final few drafts and all of a sudden we realize that like things are happening in different months, or like the characters are the wrong ages or things like that. So like all the logistical stuff I'm so bad at keeping track of. I need to have like a spreadsheet or something that I start from the beginning. But yeah, it's basically chaos, my entire writing process.
How did you get into your first book? How did you get into the publishing world?
Yeah, So I mean, I was always a writer, as most writers will probably always say that, but never thought that I would actually do it as a living. I actually went to theater school, which in retrospect seems like a strange move for thinking, oh, I can't be a writer too. I guess I'll just go to theater school. Much more viable career. After a few years, and I did my undergrad in theater, and decided that wasn't for me, and I was like, I'm gonna go back and try writing. So I did an MFA through the optional residency program at UBC. And so I wrote a thesis for that, which was a collection of short fiction, and that ended up being published 2009, I think it was, by an indie press in Canada. And it did like okay for a short fiction collection published by an indie press in Canada. But one of the things that it did was connect me with my agent. So I signed with an agent, and then I thought, oh, this is it, my career is made. And then 7 years later, 2 failed novels later, I published my next book. I got very lucky, and I met the right editor at the right time, who could see, sort of my vision and what it was that I was trying to do. And I published my first novel in 2016, which was called We're All in This Together. And then 3 years later, I published Every Little Piece of Me, and then now Pebble Dove. So I've been working with the same editor throughout the whole process. And, she's been she's an integral part. Like, she's basically taught me how to write a novel, to be honest. I mean, it's one of those things where, like, I don't think you can ever really know how to do it until you do it. And sitting down to write that first failed novel, when I say failed, I shouldn't say failed, because it's not a failure. It's a process. I tell all my students, I'm like, everything is a process. Every word that you put down on a page is progress towards whatever your final goal is, regardless of those words, whether those words make it into that final book that you're working on. But that was a very steep learning curve for me. But now, I did start writing short stories, and I still really like reading short stories, but my mind just doesn't work like that anymore. My mind works in novels. I just want to expand my worlds and, like, keep a story going. And, I really, really love the form of the novel. So, I hopefully can continue doing that until I don't want to anymore, I guess.
How do you deal with, do you and your editor work together? Is it marked up red pen? Is it digital? And what is it like getting that feedback? But when you're handing over chaos, what comes back?
It depends on what point in the process it is. Like, very early on, she doesn't tend to mark it up too badly. Instead, we end up having really long conversations, which really threw me in the beginning, because I'm like, we're having these conversations about, like, people I invented in my own head, and talking about them as though they're real and have real, like, feelings and backgrounds and motivations. But that's really how you have to think about it, really, when you're writing. So we early in the process will have these very long conversations about the characters, just what their relationships are with one another. Sometimes she'll often, like, send me, like, these really long editorial letters, but it's usually not, like, right in, no red pen on the manuscript until later. It's more about, like, developing the layers of the characters and the layers of the story, and, like, building more and more into that, and trying to help the story find its final form, which for me is always a bit of a challenge, because it's one of those things where, I have these characters, and I love them, and I want them to do things, but you have to, like, tease an actual, like, storyline out of that. You can't just, like, I mean, sometimes you can, and maybe that will work for other people, but for me, like, I want there to be a really compelling story behind it. And so she really helps me tease that out. And that a lot of that comes from getting to know the characters, getting to understand them, what they want, what their motivations are. And then later in the process, we sort of, like, it sort of shrinks down, like we're talking about the whole thing, and then we're talking about, each chapter, and then we're talking about the paragraphs and the language and the, sort of, and then when you get right down to it into the proofing, you're looking at like, the way the words actually look on the page. So it's really interesting to see that whole cycle. I'm really fascinated by it because I also, I also do some editing myself, and I do a lot of like manuscript evaluations and teaching. And so I've learned a lot from my editor about ways to deliver feedback to people that they can actually hear, because often it's really, really hard to get, I mean, we all have, no matter who we are, we have some kind of ego attached to what we've written. It's, we're pouring ourselves out onto the page. And even though we know that it's not necessarily perfect the first time around, and nor should it ever be, or nor will it ever be, it still can be sometimes really hard to hear what the work is that you need to put in. But I think really for me, thinking about it as that, as opposed to this is what you got wrong. My editor would never say this is wrong. She's like, this is the part that needs work. This is the part that needs to be built up a little bit more, or this isn't working. It needs to like be, we need to figure out a way to make this work, as opposed to, this is wrong, you have to get rid of it. And, that's sort of something that I've tried to carry through as well, in the way that I deliver feedback, because if someone's not hearing your feedback, then, and they're not able to process it, or, you're delivering it in a way that is, unnecessarily harsh. Like, I don't think, I think there's a difference between sugarcoating something and, delivering it in a way that, that hurts people. I feel like it's important to help them hear it and understand it, because that's the only way that they're going to be able to apply it.
How did you learn to take feedback? I know, like in my job, it's really hard for people to take feedback, because there comes a point in your career, whether that's like after so many books in yours or after so many news stories and in my own, where you feel like you've got a good handle on things. You feel like you know what you're doing. And then someone's telling you, this could be better. And that's not necessarily that this sucks. It's that this could be better. How did you learn to take that feedback?
I think it's interesting, because I honestly, like, I was worse at it earlier in my career. I thought I knew. I feel like the further I progress in my career, the more I realize I don't really know anything, in some ways, but then every once in a while I'm reminded, okay, yes, I do. I know how to write a novel. It's back there somewhere. So I just have to like tease it out. But I think when you're creating, at least when you're writing, and I think this is probably true of a lot of art, is, you have this vision in your head of what you want it to be before you even start creating it. Like, before I sit down in front of my computer to type the very first word of a novel, I have a picture in my head of what it feels like. Then at that point, it's just all vibes, right? Like I know the feelings that I wanted to evoke in the reader. I know kind of the atmosphere that I want. I know what it looks like. And then the second I sit down to start writing it, it ruins it. Like,
do you do that though? Do you start from the first chapter, first word? Is that where you start when you start writing, or do you start with the story and then work backwards and forwards?
I always think that I'm starting at the beginning, and then it tends to fluctuate. But I sit down and I'm like, all right, this is the first thing that I think is important for this story, and then I start writing from there. But it doesn't necessarily I don't think ever, actually, now that I think about it, was the first word that I wrote the first word that ended up in the novel. So for instance, in Pebble and Dove, Ray's chapter didn't even exist. None of Ray's chapters existed in the first few drafts. He was just sort of brought, and same with Imogen's chapters. Those were both sort of late additions, not late, but like later in the process. There's always this like gap between what you picture in your head and what ends up on the page. And for me, the best way for me to sort of process and like be able to learn to take feedback is to think of it as someone helping me narrowing that gap, right? They're reading it. It's like a hairdresser holding up a mirror to the back of your head to show you what you can't see back there, right? Sometimes when you're writing, when you're creating, you can't see the forest for the trees. You're so close to it, you can't see what hasn't made it out of your head and onto the page. And so when you have a really good reader come along and give you feedback, that's what they should be doing, is showing you what hasn't made it onto the page yet from your vision. So when I think about it in that way, as opposed to like, you know, you're not doing this right, it's a lot easier to take. It still
Your
sometimes is like,
analogy is so good. I feel
oh,
like that
good.
applies to so many different things.
Yeah, I mean, it's sort of like my philosophy of in when I'm giving feedback to other people as well, is, and I mean, again, it's like feedback is useless if the person who you're giving it to can't use it. And if there's something blocking them from understanding it, whether it's you know, their own ego, their own attachment, you know, their own ideas about you know, I think a lot of people have this misconception that, you know, if you're an artist, if you're a writer and you're really meant to be a writer and you're really talented, that you're going to get it right the first time, that you're not going to write a terrible first draft. And that's just not true. I don't know any writer who would say that they write something perfectly the first time. So, you know, once you sort of are able to see that in action, and once you're able to sort of internalize that idea, it becomes a lot easier to you know, say I can still be a good writer and have written a crappy draft of this novel.
What are the differences between draft 1 of Pebble and Dove and the end? Like, are they even recognizable in the plot and stuff?
Yeah, the plot is similar. The ending changed a bit here and there, and other characters were brought in.
What was the original ending?
The original ending, I'm trying to remember now. It's very long time ago. Like, so I mean, I played around a bit with the idea of like Lauren and her family keeping the aquarium at the end. And I also really, for the longest time, I went back and forth about whether they should actually try to free Pebble and let her go. But yeah, none of those endings quite ever worked right. Like there needed to be something in between those two things.
But in none of them Pebble dies.
No, never.
I just needed to know that the sea cow was okay.
Yes, always. It's funny because my sister is a doctor of anthrozoology, and she studies human animal relationships. And I made her a promise several years ago that I would never kill an animal in any of my books. So I feel like I should put that disclaimer on it, because a couple of people have asked me, like especially early on, whether the manatee dies, and I was like, that's not a spoiler. Like, no.
A whole website dedicated to if the dog dies in the book for people who can handle. Like I honestly think it's because of Marley and Me. I have never cried so hard in a book and a movie in my entire life, and I've never had a dog.
Yeah, and I think that, I mean, that site has expanded to like other things that you may not want to see in a movie, I think. So you can check it out and it'll tell you, or in a book. The books and movies, I think it covers a lot of media, and you can go look it up and it'll tell you, you know, if there's like, you know, a horrible, gory murder scene in it or something like that as well.
So this book done. Where are you at in your chaos now?
Well, for the first time, I'm actually working on more than one project. So usually
who doesn't plot things.
I know, right?
More than one thing on the go at a time. How's that going?
And I'm gonna get very confused about the two probably. Usually I'm very much like I'm in the world of what I'm working on and I have to stay in it. But so I started writing in my next novel, probably there's usually, so like in the publishing world, when you finish your book and you hand it in and they're like, okay, it's copy edited, it's proofed, it's ready, we're printing advanced reading copies. There's usually about a 6-month period between that and when the book comes out, where you twiddle your thumbs and you maybe hope that it like hits some lists of like most anticipated books, and maybe you do like a little bit of media here and there. But mostly it's just like waiting and feeling a little nervous about it. So that's when I'm like, I need to keep the momentum going. So I always try to start something new then. So I started my next novel around Christmas of last year, and I got pretty far in it, but I was like feeling pretty stalled because I kept having this other idea for a completely different story, completely different than anything I've ever read. And I'm not going to say what it is because it'll probably never see the light of day. I've never written anything like this before. It's a different genre. So yeah, so I thought, okay, you know what?
Tell
I
us
was
what
like,
the genre is.
it's like it's kind of like a ghost story.
Oh, cool.
Yeah.
Okay.
It's not like horror or anything like that. But it's definitely got some like supernatural elements to it. So I thought, okay, I'm just, you know what, I'm not going to put any pressure on myself. I'm just going to write this for fun. Just to take, when I'm like feeling stuck and I'm feeling really annoyed with this other novel, I'm going to start writing this for fun. So that's what I've been doing, just sort of in the, you know, whenever I am struggling with the main novel that I'm working on, which, you know, I'm still very excited about, and will definitely, it'll most likely be my next published novel. But I also have this like little area to play in, which has actually been really fun. And it's actually also opened up and made the writing of the other one a little bit easier in some ways, because, you know, once I get into, I find the hardest thing for me is like getting into the groove of working. Like, you know, I really admire, I have a lot of writer friends who have kids and they get up at 5 a.m. and they write for like an hour or two before their kids get up. I could never do that. I mean, I can't get up at 5 a.m. to begin with, but, you know, I just, or they'll like write while their kids are at swim class or something like that. And, you know, I know that they do that out of necessity because they don't have the time to like ease into it. And, you know, I work other jobs as well. So like I tend to like, be able to block off larger amounts of time. So like, you know, I'll say, okay, I have a whole afternoon where I have, you know, no meetings, nothing else to work on, I can write. And then, you know, I usually spend like the first 2 hours, like looking at Facebook or whatever, scrolling on my phone, you know, maybe send an email here or there, feeling like I'm doing work. And I've been finding that having this like little area to like play in this other novel, because there is no stakes, there's no pressure, there's no like, because I think that that's what keeps people, you know, when writers say writing is hard, that's the part that they mean. It's like opening up the document, sitting down and typing those first words. Even if you already have 30,000, 50,000 words, it's still every day, it's like you're coming back to this. And it's so easy to procrastinate around doing that because you feel this pressure. You're like, I have to write this, you know, and a lot of us, you know, for various reasons feel that pressure. But when you have this area where there's no pressure at all, it's just fun, you just get right into it. And then you get that like flow, it's like warming up your muscles. And then I can go back into the other one and be right there, as opposed to, you know, having that like 2 hours of fiddling around.
So how do you have a contract for this next book, or how do you do this book to book to book? Like, it seems like it might take you a little while to get through the writing process. So how does this work for you? Like, I don't know that like some authors, it's crazy. They can crank out an obscene amount of books, like 2 or 3 books in a year.
Yeah.
And they're on a very like regimented schedule. Granted, I would guess that they have a more formulaic process for their writing and their books are probably more similar. But in your case, how does it work for you?
Yeah. So my first 2 novels were a 2-book contract. And then now Pebble Dove is the first book of another 2-book contract. So the next book is contracted, so it's going to come out regardless, hopefully. And, you know, I have a really amazing relationship with my publisher, McCullough & Stewart. Like, I just, you know, they've been really supportive of me throughout my whole career. So I'm hoping, like, as long as I can stay there with them, I will. So, you know, it's one of those things where, like, when we were looking at, you know, signing the deal for Pebble and Dove, and, you know, they were like, how many book contract do you want? Kind of thing. And I probably could have gone for more if I wanted, but like, I also feel like you never know what's going to happen in the world. Like, you know, if you know, all of a sudden everyone who I worked with at McCullough & Stewart was fired and they had a whole new staff, maybe I wouldn't still want to be there or something like that. You know, you just never know. So I thought, but if 2 books feels good, because you always know the second one, you know, it's really, it's a very different feeling writing a book, knowing that it has a place, it has a home in the end, as opposed to, writing it on the hope and a prayer that someone is going to publish it. And, I've been in both scenarios, and I've seen, my husband's also a writer, and he's been in that scenario. He was for several years, and, I watched him like write books and, try to find a publisher for them each time. And it adds this whole other level of that pressure and those stakes to the writing.
Who are you married to?
Andrew F. Sullivan. He's a horror writer, which may be why he's like inspiring me to write ghost stories now. He has a book that just came out called The Marigold, and he has another one coming out in August called The Handyman Method. So he's one of those writers who writes like very prolifically and can crank stuff out.
It's so interesting to me how many writers end up with writers. Like it's more common than not. I don't know if it's that you get the lifestyle or what it is, but it's interesting to me how many writers are married to writers.
I mean, I think that's part of it. Part of it is, it's hard to be with someone who, you have to explain to them why you can't, go do the fun thing on the long weekend, or, why after your job is over, you have to then sit at your computer for another 2 hours. So, there's definitely that part of it. There's also the like ability to commiserate about, difficulties that you're having, whether it's with your writing or with the publishing industry or whatever it might be. And also to understand the significance of the good things that happen as well. Sometimes you could say, to your partner, like, oh, I had this like thing published in this really amazing magazine, but for them, that doesn't necessarily mean anything. But I think honestly, like a lot of it also is just who you're around, right? Like, I met my husband through other writers that we knew and just through the writing community in Toronto. And, I just think that when, you have so much in common like that and you're spending time together like that, it seems pretty natural. I mean, and some people would definitely, like, I know other writers who are like, I would never want to live with another writer. I just need someone who can like be in a different world from me, and so I can escape this world. But yeah, for us, it's worked out pretty well so far.
It's interesting you mentioned that Toronto writing community, because I've talked to so many different Canadian authors over this year, and everyone has a love-in for the Toronto writing community. Everyone knows everyone supports everyone. And as I get onto social media, I've connected with a lot of them like post book club, and they're sharing each other's books. And it's really fun to see, because Canada's writing community, I mean, big country, not massive community.
Yeah, exactly. And I think, I have so much love for the Toronto writing community. Honestly, I came there from Thunder Bay, which where I was living when I wrote my first novel, which I also love, but doesn't have much of a writing community. There's, I felt very isolated. So, I mean, this was back in also like the heyday of Twitter. So, I was able to find a community through social media of other writers who were sort of at the same stage as their career as me. But I also have spent time on either coast. And, I find very similarly to that, we think of Toronto as being like, the center of everything, which in some ways it is, because that's where all the publishing houses are. That's where all the, literary agencies are, all of that stuff. But there's so much interesting and like really great community building going on in Vancouver and Halifax as well. And I'm assuming, in every province, every city, there has something similar like that going on. So I just think that, for most writers, like, I don't know, like I had this image in my head before I started to get to know other writers that everybody was going to be really, I don't know, what's the word, like pretentious, and like people were going to be
too, right?
Yeah, competitive. Exactly. Like I thought it was going to be really just a totally different thing. And, there's a possibility that it used to be like that, but I feel like now, for one thing, there's just not enough to be competitive about, right? like we're all sort of in the same boat where like, the people aren't getting, we know that probably none of us are going to like be world famous. None of us are going to get like the $1 zillion publishing deals. We just want to do our work and, be like a lot of us, like I really, really I really thrive on being around other artists, you know, not just writers, but like just other creative people, and like talking about, you know, art and what things people are working on, and, you know, just the process of that and how to make a life like that. Like, I really find it inspiring. So, you know, for me, Toronto was great because there was just so much of that. And, you know, there was always something to go to, you know, there's always like a book launch or, you know, some kind of event that, you know, when you go there, you'll probably see some people, you know, and even if you don't, everybody will generally be pretty welcoming, I find, you know, and it's very contrary to what I expected it to be like.
That's been by far the most surprising thing as I get to know authors across the country. It's just not that I ever expected people to be not kind and nice, but I think that it's the you grew up and these authors are on a pedestal and it's this whole thing, and then I mean, it's much like meeting musicians or anything else. They're people just like us.
Exactly. Exactly.
I really want to keep this to an hour because I'm cognizant of what time it is there for you, but I do want to open this up to, there's people in the room. We've got someone online. Do any of you have, Carlos always has a question. But I'm gonna take my earbud out and I'm gonna move the microphone over this way and I'm gonna turn this around. I'm gonna put you guys on the spot.
Hello.
I'll have to come closer so that she can hear you, but come ask your questions. Come on.
Hi, Amy, I'm Carlos.
Hi, Carlos.
Middle here. Excellent book. I really enjoyed it, so thank you.
Thank you.
You can hear me fine, which is good. So Sam had a couple of good observations. I was going to compliment you and your editor because it was such a well-written book. So it was really nice to hear the kind of the story behind the editing and stuff. So I have two. I guess I actually have a few, but I'll keep it short.
Go ahead, it's fine. Take my job, Carlos. It's fine.
You also mentioned the Toronto community. I saw you posted about Bianca Maris, or she posted about your book, and we read her book a little while ago. And
The Witches of Moonshine Manor. So good.
Also so good. So it was sort of funny that Sam's bringing these things up, but I'm also got it in my head. So the question was, and then I apologize if it's in the book and I missed it. Did you ever explain what happened to Raina? Like I kind of.
Oh, now that you ask, what happened to Rita?
She was passed.
Yes.
I thought she may have committed suicide, but I was rethinking about the book on the way here, and I'm like, I don't know if that was ever confirmed, right?
No, you're right. I left it ambiguous on purpose because I didn't want that to be the story, right? That wasn't the story of them. The story of them was not like in my mind. So, she does pass away at the end of, not at the end, but like it's imminent. And, I sort of, and it's kind of unfair to her that I, narratively wanted to have her in a medically induced coma so Ray could tell her the story. But, I thought a lot about like the ways to like whether I should be connecting it to some of the other issues that the two of them had together, for instance, her infertility or whatever. The only real like clue I guess that I gave to like what was wrong with her was at the very beginning. I said, like, I think in the very first paragraph there's something about her arrhythmatic heart. So in my mind, she had a heart condition that, or she had a heart attack or something like that. But honestly, I wanted to leave it ambiguous more so because I didn't want that to be the story. I wanted the story to be of their past and their marriage together.
For this group, it's kind of funny. We read two very different books. We're infertility, like back to back. Very different.
Completely unintentional.
Yeah. Infertility, that wasn't a big part of this book, but it was definitely part of Ray and Rihanna's story. Raina's story. And then the other one, as a reader, I always like to imagine the story after the book is done. So do you as the author have thoughts on Lauren and Jason and Dove post the end of the book? Post the epilogues? So,
yeah. No, that's a really great question. And it's something that I think probably, I think for all of my novels, I've had this like vision of, kind of what is going to happen after. So for instance, one of the things that I talked about a lot with my editor was whether I imagined that Lauren and Jason were going to get divorced or not. And, even though I don't think it ever like there was no definitive answer within the story. I think me knowing the answer for myself kind of informed the way that part of the storyline played out in the book. But generally, I tend to think about my books and my characters as like me, back to what we were talking about at the very beginning of this, with the with Sam's mom with the binoculars, it's like I'm giving the reader like a little like glimpse into this part of these characters' lives, and what happened before that and what happened after that is a bit of a mystery, and it is. And I sort of like to keep it that way also for myself. So I don't tend to, and this is why, like, when my first book came out, a lot of people asked me if I was going to write a sequel. And to me, those characters had gone on and lived their lives, and, without me as a part of it. It was, I kind of think of it in some ways as like, I mean, I don't have kids, but I imagine like, you raise your kids well, and then you send them off to college and you hope that they do well. You hope that you armed them with, enough knowledge and empathy to go out into the world and do good things. And that's what I hope for my characters as well. But, it's almost like in my mind, I'm like, you've moved on now, and it's not my business anymore. I'm going to stop spying on you and let you live your lives.
Real quick then, ask her, did they get back together?
So do they get back together? He wants to know.
In my mind, no, they don't. I feel like it's probably, I don't know. What did you guys think? Did you have any ideas either way?
Oh, I see heads shaking.
I think no.
Well, she said something, Lauren said something like she was okay with it and it was done.
Yeah, I think, it's that acceptance of like, yeah, she stops fighting against it, right? And I think that in that moment, if there's not one person who like is really fighting against it, that, they both sort of come to accept that this is the right move, or at least that something has to change, right? Like maybe it's not necessarily divorce, although I think in this case it probably is.
Any more questions?
Okay, fine.
Okay, come up.
When you said earlier that you wrote short story or short fiction first, it popped into my mind when Lauren realized there was like a screenshot of the girls from her book club from the bees on the head. So when you suggest short stories, is that a little Easter egg? And you don't like writing short stories anymore?
It's not so much, it's more because I mean, I still really love short stories, but I feel like, okay, so I was in a book club once in Thunder Bay, and I really enjoyed it and I was loving it. And then it was my turn to pick a book, and I was like, oh, I really want to pick this book of short stories. And everyone said, yeah, that's totally great. You should do it. And then I did it, and it killed the book club. Like the book club just stopped meeting after that. And then I think they reformed without me like later. So yeah, I mean, it's more like, I guess it's more a joke about like how, I know people who love short fiction, and people who love it really love it. And I'm one of those people for sure, but it's definitely like widely, I think, misunderstood amongst a lot of readers who prefer to read novels. And I think it's a different skill to read short stories. I think, it's a different part of your brain. And I almost think of like, it's almost like closer to reading poetry in some ways, I think. And yeah, no, I really admire people who are able to go back and forth between novels and short stories, but just it's not that I don't like writing them. It's that, now when I get an idea, like I can't just like let it go at a short story length. It has to keep going. But yeah, I love that you caught on to that, because I put that in, and my editor like put like in the margin, she put like a bunch of little like frowny faces next to it, because it's true. Honestly, it's true. I mean, this is why it's so hard to get a short story collection published, at least by like a bigger publishing house in Canada right now. Like, you know, there's a lot of indie presses that have kind of made their mark with short fiction. And I think that, you know, they'll continue to do so. And that's where all of the innovation will happen in that genre. But, you know, getting a short fiction collection published by Penguin Random House, like unless you're like Alexander McLeod, it's probably not going to happen. And it's just because they just don't sell as well. And I don't know why that is. I can't explain it, but because you would think in this day and age when everything is very like soundbitey and very, you know, short, and that everyone, you know, our attention spans are shrinking, that a short story would be perfect for that. But for some reason that just hasn't quite translated to everybody yet. So.
Okay, and I also just wanted to say you almost need a trigger warning because I got so much anxiety about Gordon Lake. And I think we've all been sucked into some sort of a pyramid scheme or something. I was like, and then
Well, the candle company?
Yeah.
Yes.
We've all been sucked into something like that. Did you have an inspiration for that? Were you sucked into?
Yeah, it wasn't me, thankfully. But there was like a whole, when I was living in Thunder Bay, there was like a whole, it spread like wildfire through my friends, right? Like one person gets into it. I think it was like party light or something. It was candles and like diffusers, very much like Gordon Lake. But it's like, you know, one person starts doing it and, you know, all of a sudden they like, you know, get everybody else involved. And it just like, all, you know, especially in a market like Thunder Bay, which, you know, is fairly, it's a city, but it's fairly small, and you're gonna exhaust the people who are gonna want to buy candles from you pretty quickly. So I knew a lot of people who got sucked into that and then just were left out to dry really at the end. And, you know, I find that because I mean, I'm not immune to being, you know, sucked into those kind of things, especially when you're feeling vulnerable or you're feeling like, and, you know, I see the way that those companies really prey on, especially women who, you know, feel like, you know, maybe they had a career that they gave up for their family or whatever that might be, and they're missing some kind of meaning in their life. That's how they get them, right? They're like, do this and you'll be able to, you know, realize all of your dreams. And, you know, I see that through MLMs. I see that, you know, on my Instagram ads all the time. They're trying to get me to, you know, sell things or buy things or whatever, just to like, fill some kind of hole that I might have inside me. Yeah, so I think none of us, I feel like that all of us have the potential to fall for something like that.
Any other thoughts or comments from the gallery? No? Lots of smiling faces. Ooh. Back to me. Ooh, ooh, ooh. I don't trust. There we go. No trust. Okay. Well, is there anything? Okay. I was going to say, is there anything else you want to add? But that's a very interviewee question, and that's not what we're doing here. When can we expect the next Amy Jones book out?
Well, I was trying to keep on like a 2 to 3 year schedule. The pandemic threw that off a little bit. And I mean, that was more because I love doing stuff like this, like book clubs, writing like literary festivals, meeting readers. And, you know, I wanted to sort of be in a world where that was more going to be in person, although I still really love doing virtual events as well. And like having the ability to like, you know, zoom into book clubs is fantastic. It's so amazing. And that's like, I'm really glad that like so many people are keeping that from, you know, the silver lining, I guess. If
the hybrid is our
that.
silver lining. That's
yes,
all. That's
exactly.
Because before we didn't have access to authors, right? Like we're in Regina, we're in, you know, people aren't going to fly out for a 1 hour conversation. Right. It's not cheap to travel in Canada. So it's a cool way for you to connect with your readers and for them to connect with you.
Exactly. So, you know, I'm really glad, like, I'm really excited about all of the, you know, those sort of hybrid opportunities that are coming up. But really, I wanted to make sure that, you know, I was in a world where I could have like, you know, a big book launch party when my book came out and stuff like that. And so it was originally going to be spring 2022, but we weren't quite sure. Things were still a little bit shaky then. And also it would have been a rush at that point because, you know, I just like probably everybody, I just slowed down considerably during the pandemic. Working was tough for a few months, years. So, you know, things went a little bit slower, but you know, I'm hoping to pick the pace back up because, you know, I have a lot of ideas and a lot of books that I still want to write. So, you know, it'll probably be a couple of years, but
The long answer is I have no idea, but
I
it's
have no idea. It won't be 10 years. It won't be 5 years. It may be 2 years, possibly 3 years.
That's fine. I do hope that we get to see your ghost story though too, because I do think it's really
Yeah.
cool when an author tries something outside their wheelhouse and it actually works out for them, right? Just that creative spark to try something different.
Yeah, and I mean, I'm hoping that I can have, I don't know what the word is, but like, it's not like beginner's luck, but like just the fact that I don't know what I'm doing and I don't have any like context for it, that, you know, I can actually come up with something interesting. So yeah, we'll see what happens with that.
I'm told that's beginner's luck in poker. So if you don't know what
Yeah.
you're doing, that's often how you bluff your way through. So you've just got to
Exactly.
work on your ghost story poker face.
That's what I'm doing. I'm bluffing my way through it.
Last question for you. What is the best book you've read lately that you would recommend to the people in this room?
Oh, that's a great question. What is the best book I've read recently? Do you guys like really weird books?
I mean, sure. I mean, I don't not like weird books.
Right. Okay. So I would say the best book that I've read so far this year, it came out last year, a couple of years ago. It's called Kill Them All by Pasha Mala. I don't know if you're familiar with his writing, but he has a few other novels. And this book, it's very weird. It's not a horror book. It's not even really like, on the surface, it doesn't really seem that weird, but it's very quirky. I really, really enjoyed it. I'm also currently, I listen to a lot of audiobooks, and I'm listening to Romantic Comedy by Curtis Sittenfeld right now.
Ooh, that's on my list.
Oh my gosh, it's so good. So that, you know, that, and totally different than the first book I recommended, but it's just so funny and so smart. Like no one writes romantic comedies like she does. And this is just, yeah, it's just on another level. It's really, really good.
Well, thank you so much for sharing your time with us tonight. Thank you for Pebble and Dove. I see sea cows differently now. I Googled them more than once while I was reading this book, just to like get the visual of the flippers and the on the back. Like
you're not the first person to tell me that.
I was like, am I visioning what this actually looks like? 'Cause we live in Saskatchewan. Cows here are cows, not sea cows. So, yes. Well, Amy, thank you so much for this tonight. We so appreciate your time.
Thank you so much. This has been really fun.
Take care.
Take care. Bye.